Have you ever felt that inexplicable connection with someone who has passed away? That spine-tingling sensation, that feeling of presence, as if for one fleeting moment, the veil between worlds had become as thin as a sheet of paper. I'm not talking about ghosts or cheap superstitions. I'm talking about that visceral certainty born from the deepest part of your being, telling you that consciousness simply cannot disappear. World-renowned scientists have begun to question whether death is really the end of the journey. Quantum physicists, neurologists, and near-death experience researchers have collected surprising evidence suggesting something extraordinary. Perhaps our loved ones aren't really dead in the traditional sense. Perhaps they're living in a parallel universe that exists simultaneously with ours, separated only by dimensions we cannot yet fully comprehend. Imagine for a moment that your grandmother, your father, or that friend who departed too soon didn't disappear. They just moved to an adjacent reality. A reality where time flows differently, where physical limitations don't exist as we know them, but where their essence, their memories, personalities, and emotional connections remains intact. What if we could prove that at this very second as you watch this video, they are living an existence that transcends everything our conditioned minds can conceive? The stories are remarkable, small children describing with frightening accuracy past lives they could never have known. Coma patients reporting conversations that happened rooms away. People clinically dead for minutes, sometimes hours, returning with verifiable information about places and events that occurred while their hearts weren't beating. What are these experiences shared across different cultures, religions, and eras trying to tell us about what really happens when we cross the threshold? In this video, I'll share with you discoveries that have been systematically ignored by conventional science but are slowly emerging from the most respected laboratories on the planet. I'll show how quantum physics, advanced neuroscience, and consciousness studies are converging toward a conclusion that may completely redefine how we view life and death. Prepare to question everything you thought you knew about what really happens when we close our eyes for the last time in this plane of existence, and where exactly the people we love are now. Death has always been humanity's final frontier, the ultimate unknown that has inspired our greatest fears and our most profound spiritual traditions. But what if everything we thought we knew about death is fundamentally wrong? What if that loved one you've been grieving, your mother, your child, your dearest friend, isn't gone at all but living in a parallel dimension that exists right alongside our own? This isn't fantasy or wishful thinking. It's a hypothesis, increasingly supported by the most cutting-edge discoveries in quantum physics, alongside wisdom traditions that have mapped the afterlife for thousands of years. Today, we're going to explore the extraordinary evidence suggesting that consciousness doesn't end with physical death, but transitions to another layer of reality, one that might be much closer than you ever imagined. Quantum physics has revolutionized our understanding of reality in ways that would have seemed impossible just a century ago. The famous double-slit experiment demonstrated that particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until observed, a phenomenon called quantum superposition. Even more mind-bending is quantum entanglement, where particles remain connected regardless of the distance between them, what Einstein called spooky action at a distance. These aren't just abstract scientific curiosities, they're gateways to understanding how consciousness itself might transcend the physical brain and continue existing in quantum fields after bodily death. When scientists like Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff proposed that consciousness resides in quantum processes within brain microtubules, they opened the door to a revolutionary idea. Our consciousness operates on quantum principles that aren't confined to the physical body. Think about the last time you felt the presence of someone who had passed away, that unmistakable sensation that they were somehow in the room with you. Perhaps it came as a familiar scent, a dream so vivid it felt more real than waking life, or simply a certainty so profound it defied rational explanation. Our modern world has conditioned us to dismiss these experiences as imagination or grief-induced hallucinations. But what if these moments represent genuine connections across dimensional boundaries? Quantum physics suggests that once particles interact, they remain entangled forever. The deep bonds we form with others create quantum entanglements, that don't simply vanish when one person's physical body ceases to function. The person you love hasn't disappeared. They've shifted to a different frequency of existence, one that occasionally overlaps with ours in these fleeting moments of connection. Near-death experiences, NDEs, provide some of our most compelling evidence for the parallel universe hypothesis. Across cultures, religions, and throughout history, those who have clinically died and been resuscitated report strikingly similar experiences. Moving through tunnels of light, encountering deceased loved ones who appear fully alive and vibrant, and experiencing realms where time and space operate by different rules. Skeptics have tried to dismiss these as oxygen-deprived hallucinations, but this explanation falls short when we consider that many NDE survivors return with verifiable information they couldn't possibly have known. Details about conversations that occurred while they were clinically dead, or accurate descriptions of objects and events far from their bodies. These aren't the random firing of dying neurons. They're glimpses into the reality that awaits us all, a quantum realm where consciousness continues beyond the physical body. Ancient spiritual traditions worldwide have described this multiverse reality long before quantum physics gave us scientific language for it. The Tibetan Book of the Dead details the Bardo states, intermediate dimensions between death and rebirth where consciousness travels. Hindu cosmology describes multiple lokas, or planes of existence populated by conscious beings at various stages of development. Indigenous shamanic traditions speak of journeying to realms where ancestors dwell not as memories but as fully sentient beings. Even Christianity references many mansions in the afterlife. These aren't primitive superstitions. They're sophisticated cartographies of consciousness describing the same quantum reality. Our most advanced physics is only beginning to map. The consistency of these accounts across completely isolated cultural traditions suggests they're describing something real, something fundamental to the nature of consciousness itself. What if death is simply a phase transition, like water becoming vapor? The water doesn't cease to exist. It merely changes form in ways our eyes weren't designed to track. Similarly, consciousness doesn't end at death. It undergoes a transformation that our physical senses can't directly perceive. Physicist Sir James Jeans once wrote that the universe begins to look more like a great thought than a great machine, suggesting that reality at its most fundamental level is mental rather than material. If consciousness is primary, not a nature emergent property of the brain but the fundamental reality from which matter arises, then it can't be destroyed when the physical brain stops functioning. It would simply shift to another expression within the vast quantum field of consciousness that underlies all reality. Your loved ones haven't disappeared into nothingness. They've expanded into everything. The multiverse theory in quantum physics proposes that an infinite number of universes exist simultaneously with our own. Each represents a different configuration of possibilities, some nearly identical to our world with only minor variations, others wildly different with alternate physical laws. This isn't science fiction. It's a serious hypothesis embraced by many leading physicists to explain quantum phenomena. Applied to consciousness, it suggests that when physical death occurs in this universe, consciousness naturally transitions to one of these parallel realities, a dimension where it continues to exist and evolve. Some researchers propose that this transition happens through quantum tunneling, a well-established quantum phenomenon where particles pass through barriers that should be impassable according to classical physics. If consciousness operates on quantum principles, it could similarly tunnel from our dimension to another at the moment of physical death. What might existence be like in this parallel reality? Accounts from spiritual traditions and near-death experiences suggest a realm where the limitations of physical form no longer apply. Imagine being able to travel at the speed of thought, to communicate directly mind to mind without the clumsy medium of language, to access knowledge and memories across vast stretches of time and space. In higher dimensions, time itself may not flow linearly as it does in our three-dimensional experience. Your grandmother who passed away 20 years ago isn't lost in the distant past. She exists in a dimension where all moments exist simultaneously. She may be able to perceive your entire lifetime as a complete tapestry rather than a linear progression, understanding your journey with a wisdom and perspective that transcends chronological time. She may even be able to influence your reality in subtle ways, sending guidance that your conscious mind interprets as intuition or those inexplicable moments of knowing. The barrier between our physical universe and the quantum realm where consciousness continues isn't impermeable. Quantum entanglement demonstrates that particles once connected remain linked regardless of distance. What happens to one instantly affects the other, even across the vast expanse of the universe. This principle, applied to consciousness, suggests that the bonds we form with others create entanglements that persist beyond physical death. The profound connections you shared with your loved ones, your father, your childhood friend, your partner of many years, created quantum entanglements that didn't dissolve when their physical bodies ceased functioning. These entanglements form channels through which communication and connection can still flow, albeit in ways our three-dimensional perception struggles to interpret consistently. Instrumental transcommunication, ITC research, has yielded some of the most intriguing evidence for these cross-dimensional connections. Researchers using recording devices have captured unexplainable voices, images, and even videos that seem to originate from beyond our physical plane. In controlled laboratory settings with electromagnetic shielding that eliminates conventional explanations, these phenomena persist. Skeptics dismiss such evidence, yet they struggle to explain how specific, verifiable information unknown to the researchers frequently comes through in these communications. The Global Consciousness Project at Princeton University has documented measurable effects on random number generators during major global events, suggesting a field of consciousness that transcends individual minds. These scientific investigations point toward consciousness as a field phenomenon rather than something confined to individual brains, a perspective that aligns perfectly with the parallel universe hypothesis. Dreams often serve as windows between dimensions, providing a natural state where our consciousness partially detaches from physical reality and becomes more receptive to connections with the quantum realm. This explains why meaningful dreams about deceased loved ones feel qualitatively different from ordinary dreams, more vivid, more emotionally resonant, more real. Neurological research has shown that during deep dream states, the brain processes information in quantum rather than classical ways, potentially enabling brief alignments between dimensional frequencies. Your aunt who visits you in dreams bringing messages or comfort isn't a psychological projection of your grief. She's making genuine contact from her parallel reality, using the natural quantum bridge that dreaming provides. These aren't just comforting stories. They represent moments when the gossamer veil between dimensions temporarily thins, allowing consciousness to communicate across the boundary. Synchronicities, those meaningful coincidences that defy statistical probability, offer another glimpse into cross-dimensional influence. Carl Jung, who coined the term, believed these represented moments when the archaic quantum layer of reality briefly surfaces into physical experience. When you're thinking about your deceased brother and suddenly his favorite song plays on the radio, or you find a meaningful object inexplicably placed in your path, you're experiencing quantum entanglement in action. Scientists studying quantum field theory have demonstrated that particles can influence each other across vast distances, suggesting a fundamental interconnectedness to reality that transcends our conventional understanding of space and time. The loved ones who have transitioned to parallel dimensions can and do reach across that boundary, orchestrating subtle alignments of circumstance that we experience as meaningful coincidences. Children often demonstrate a natural, perceptual openness to these interdimensional connections. Countless parents have documented young children accurately describing deceased relatives they never met, recounting specific details impossible to know through conventional means. Developmental psychologists attribute this to children's brains operating in theta wave states more frequently than adult brains, creating greater receptivity to quantum information. This isn't imagination or fantasy. It's a natural perceptual ability that most humans possess in childhood before cultural conditioning and left brain dominance gradually close this interdimensional doorway. Some adults retain or recover this perceptual sensitivity, experiencing it as mediumship or intuitive abilities. These aren't supernatural gifts. but natural human capacities to perceive quantum information flowing between parallel dimensions of reality. The science of consciousness has made remarkable strides in recent decades, with researchers like Dean Radin, Rupert Sheldrake, and Gary Schwartz conducting rigorous experiments demonstrating that consciousness exhibits properties that can't be explained by conventional materialist models. Studies on telepathy, remote viewing, and precognition have yielded statistically significant results that point toward consciousness operating beyond the confines of the physical brain. The CIA and other government agencies have invested millions in researching these phenomena, resulting in classified programs like Stargate that yielded sufficient results to maintain funding for decades. These aren't fringe investigations, but serious scientific inquiries suggesting that consciousness accesses information through quantum fields rather than solely through physical senses. Exactly what we would expect if consciousness fundamentally operates on quantum principles that transcend physical death. Quantum biology is revealing that living systems harness quantum effects for essential functions. Photosynthesis relies on quantum coherence to achieve its remarkable efficiency. Birds navigate using quantum entanglement in their visual systems. The human sense of smell depends on quantum tunneling. Most significantly, growing evidence suggests that neurons maintain quantum coherence despite the brain's warm, wet environment, previously thought hostile to quantum effects. If biological systems routinely utilize quantum phenomena for ordinary functions, the quantum nature of consciousness becomes not just plausible but probable. This emerging field provides the missing link between quantum physics and consciousness research, explaining how the brain might serve as a quantum receiver, a biological antenna tuning into consciousness fields rather than generating consciousness itself. When the physical antenna ceases functioning at death, the signal it received, your essential consciousness, continues existing in the quantum field, simply no longer expressed through that particular physical system. Consciousness researchers propose that what we call reality emerges from the interaction between consciousness and quantum fields. This perspective reframes the materialist assumption that consciousness emerges from matter, suggesting instead that matter emerges from consciousness, a view consistent with both quantum physics and ancient wisdom traditions. The implications are profound. If consciousness is primary and matter secondary, then consciousness can't be destroyed when the physical brain stops functioning. It would continue existing in the quantum field, naturally transitioning to expression in a parallel dimension where the limitations of physical form no longer apply. Your spouse, child, or friend who has died remains conscious in this parallel dimension, experiencing reality through different means, but retaining their essential identity, memories, and connection to you through quantum entanglement. Physicist and consciousness researcher Tom Campbell describes reality as a virtual system, an information field rather than a material construct. In his My Big Toe theory of everything, he proposes that consciousness is fundamental, with physical reality being a virtual rendering experienced by consciousness. This model elegantly explains both quantum phenomena and paranormal experiences, including communication with those who have transitioned beyond physical death. Consciousness doesn't die because it was never solely contained in the physical body to begin with. It merely shifts its experiential focus from one virtual reality system, physical life, to another, the parallel dimension we enter at death. The implications are revolutionary. Your deceased loved ones aren't gone or reduced to memories. They've transitioned to another expression of consciousness within the greater information field, one where they continue to grow, learn, and remain, connected to you through quantum bonds that transcend dimensional boundaries. Throughout human history, across every culture and civilization, people have reported communication from those who have crossed the threshold of death. In our modern materialist era, we've been conditioned to dismiss these experiences as wishful thinking or psychological projection. Yet the consistency, specificity, and life-transforming impact of these communications suggests something far more profound is occurring. When a grieving mother receives specific, verifiable information from her deceased child that she couldn't possibly have known. When a skeptical researcher obtains facts through mediumship that later prove accurate. When ordinary people with No history of psychological issues consistently reports similar patterns of communication from loved ones. We're witnessing something that demands serious consideration. These aren't isolated anomalies, but a consistent pattern suggesting that consciousness persists beyond physical death and retains the ability to communicate across dimensional boundaries. The most compelling evidence comes from cases involving specific verifiable information unknown to anyone living. The Skull experiment, conducted under strict scientific protocols over 5 years, produced physical objects, films, and recordings containing information later verified as accurate but unknown to any participants. Dr. Gary Schwartz's controlled studies at the University of Arizona demonstrated that skilled mediums could obtain highly specific information about deceased individuals under blinded conditions that eliminated conventional explanations. The combined weight of thousands of such documented cases across different researchers, methodologies, and cultural contexts creates an evidential pattern that strongly supports genuine communication from parallel dimensions. Skeptics must resort to increasingly implausible explanations involving elaborate conspiracies or unprecedented statistical anomalies to dismiss this body of evidence. Explanations that themselves violate Occam's razor by requiring more extraordinary assumptions than the phenomenon they attempt to debunk. The nature of these communications provides fascinating insights into existence in the parallel dimension. Those who have crossed over consistently describe experiencing an expanded consciousness, freed from physical limitations, able to perceive across vast distances, access information previously unknown to them, and experience time non-linearly. They report continuing to grow and learn, forming communities with others who have transitioned and maintaining awareness of events in our physical dimension. Many describe being able to perceive the thoughts and emotions of their loved ones, still in physical form, not through psychic powers, but simply because consciousness in their dimension naturally perceives the quantum information our physical senses filter out. Your grandfather who passed 10 years ago may be aware of your struggles, achievements, and even private thoughts in ways that would seem impossible from a materialist perspective, but make perfect sense within quantum consciousness theory. The emotional content of these communications reveals perhaps the most significant insight. Those who have transitioned consistently express that death was not an ending, but an awakening. They describe an initial period of adjustment as they acclimate to existence without physical form, followed by an expansion of awareness they struggle to convey in our limited language. They report experiencing profound peace, expanded understanding, and release from physical suffering, while retaining their essential identity, memories, and connections to those they love. Many express concern not for themselves, but for the excessive grief of those left behind, attempting to communicate that they are not gone but transformed, not lost, but more fully alive than ever before. They describe watching over their loved ones, attempting to send comfort and guidance, and sometimes expressing frustration at their limited ability to make their continued existence known across the dimensional boundary. Mediums with proven track records of providing specific, verifiable information serve as bridges between dimensions, translating communications from the quantum field into language our physical minds can comprehend. The best mediums undergo rigorous scientific testing that eliminates conventional explanations like cold reading or prior research. They demonstrate the ability to obtain highly specific information, names, dates, obscure personal details, private conversations, that can be verified, but wasn't previously known to anyone present. What's particularly significant is the consistent pattern of evidential quality across different mediums working independently in different cultural contexts. They obtain similar patterns of information and describe similar mechanics of interdimensional communication, despite having no connection to each other. Exactly what we would expect if they were genuinely perceiving the same underlying reality, rather than engaging in fraud or fantasy. Deathbed experiences provide another window into the transition between dimensions. Medical professionals worldwide have documented remarkably consistent patterns in how people experience the dying process, regardless of their prior beliefs. Patients near death frequently report seeing deceased loved ones who come to assist their transition, not as hallucinations or dreams, but as clear, lucid perceptions more vivid than ordinary reality. What's particularly evidential is that these visitations often involve people the dying person didn't know had died. Cases where someone appears who the patient thought was still alive, but who had in fact died recently without the patient's knowledge. These cases eliminate psychological expectation as an explanation and suggest genuine perception of those who have already transitioned to the parallel dimension. Hospice nurses report that as death approaches, patients increasingly perceive and interact with this other dimension, often describing in detail the deceased loved ones waiting to help them cross over. Children who remember previous lives provide some of our most compelling evidence for consciousness continuing across dimensions. Dr. Ian Stevenson and his successors at the University of Virginia have documented over 2,000 cases of children spontaneously reporting specific memories of previous lives, often including verifiable details impossible to obtain through normal means. These children frequently exhibit behaviors, skills, phobias, and physical characteristics connected to their previous personality, sometimes including birthmarks corresponding to fatal wounds. What's particularly significant is that these memories typically begin as soon as children can speak, around age 2 or 3, and fade by age 7, suggesting not imagination, but genuine memories that gradually get overlaid by current life experiences. These cases occur worldwide regardless of cultural or religious context, with the strongest cases involving children remembering ordinary people rather than famous figures, eliminating fantasy or parental suggestion as plausible explanations. The most profound communications from the parallel dimension don't come through words but through direct experience, moments of non-ordinary consciousness where the veil between dimensions temporarily dissolves. People who have experienced these states report a direct knowing that transcends language, an absolute certainty about the continued existence of consciousness that transforms their relationship with death. This state can be accessed through deep meditation, certain plant medicines, used in indigenous spiritual traditions or sometimes spontaneously, during moments of extreme emotion or proximity to death. Neuroscientist Dr. Eben Alexander experienced such a state during a coma caused by bacterial meningitis, a condition that shut down his neocortex, eliminating conventional explanations for his detailed experiences of another dimensional reality. When parts of the brain associated with filtering our perceptual field temporarily deactivate, consciousness naturally expands beyond its ordinary boundaries, allowing direct perception of the parallel dimensions that exist alongside our own. Quantum healing represents another manifestation of communication between dimensions. Cases of spontaneous remission from terminal illness, extraordinarily rapid healing, or recovery from conditions deemed permanently debilitating by medical science often occur in conjunction with a sense of intervention from deceased loved ones or spiritual presences. Researchers studying these cases have documented measurable physiological changes that defy conventional medical explanation. The emerging field of psychoneuroimmunology provides a bridge for understanding how consciousness, including influence from non-physical dimensions, can dramatically affect physical systems. The parallel dimension hypothesis suggests that those who have transitioned retain the ability to influence physical reality through quantum fields, particularly where strong, emotional connections create quantum entanglement. Your mother who passed away might be able to assist your healing process through this quantum connection, not through miraculous intervention, but through the natural physics of consciousness operating across dimensional boundaries. Once we recognize that our deceased loved ones continue existing in a parallel dimension, accessible through the quantum nature of consciousness, our entire relationship with death transforms. Grief doesn't disappear, but it fundamentally changes character. We're no longer mourning an absolute absence, but adapting to a new type of relationship, one that continues across dimensional boundaries. This perspective doesn't invalidate the pain of physical separation, but places it within a larger context that includes the reality of ongoing connection. Many who have embraced this understanding report that their grief becomes less about loss and more about learning a new language of communication, developing the perceptual sensitivity to recognize the subtle ways their loved ones continue to interact with them across the dimensional boundary. This isn't denial or fantasy. but a practical recognition of the quantum nature of consciousness and the reality of continued existence beyond physical form. Cultivating awareness of these interdimensional connections begins with attention. Our modern world bombards us with external stimuli that keep attention outwardly focused, while interdimensional communication requires developing sensitivity to subtler forms of information. The quantum whispers beneath the shouting of physical senses. Simple practices like meditation, spending time in nature, or setting aside periods of quiet contemplation create the conditions where perception of these subtle communications becomes possible. Particularly powerful is the practice of conscious dreaming. Learning to maintain awareness during dream states where the natural thinning of the dimensional boundary facilitates clearer communication. Those who develop this perceptual sensitivity report increasingly clear and consistent connections with loved ones who have transitioned, moving from vague feelings of presence to more specific forms of communication that provide genuine comfort and guidance. The quantum nature of these connections explains why emotional states so profoundly affect our ability to perceive them. Strong emotions, particularly love, but also intense grief, create powerful quantum fields that can either facilitate or block interdimensional communication. This is why connection with deceased loved ones often occurs during unexpected moments of emotional openness rather than when desperately sought. The paradox of interdimensional connection is that it requires both active intention and receptive surrender, the balance of reaching out while remaining open to communication that may come in unexpected forms. Those who have developed this balance report that connections with loved ones in the parallel dimension gradually become more reliable and clear. Never as simple as physical conversation, but genuine two-way communication nonetheless. Your father, who passed, isn't gone from your life, but is learning alongside you how to communicate across dimensional boundaries. The implications extend beyond individual relationships to our entire understanding of human development across lifetimes. If consciousness continues evolving through the death transition and eventually returns to physical experience through rebirth, as both ancient wisdom traditions and contemporary near-death experiences suggest, then each life represents one chapter in an ongoing journey of consciousness development. The relationships we form, the lessons we learn, and the growth we experience don't disappear at death but continue developing across dimensions and perhaps across multiple physical lifetimes. This perspective transforms our understanding of purpose. We're not isolated beings struggling for meaning in a brief physical existence, but multidimensional consciousness on an eternal journey of growth and evolution. The challenges and triumphs of this lifetime take on new significance as contributions to your soul's ongoing development, rather than temporary experiences that end at death. Spiritual traditions worldwide offer practices specifically designed to strengthen interdimensional awareness and communication. Ancestor veneration traditions across cultures aren't superstition, but practical recognition of the continued existence of those who have transitioned and the possibility of ongoing relationship. Meditation techniques from Buddhist and Hindu traditions systematically develop the subtle perception necessary to recognize consciousness beyond physical form. Shamanic practices worldwide include specific methodologies for journeying to realms where communication with the deceased occurs naturally. Even Western religious traditions contain contemplative practices that foster awareness of dimensions beyond the physical. These diverse approaches share common elements: quieting the chattering mind, developing attention to subtle perception, and cultivating the emotional openness that facilitates quantum connection. They represent not blind faith, but practical technologies for developing interdimensional awareness. Some individuals naturally possess greater sensitivity to these interdimensional connections, what we might call mediumistic abilities. Rather than representing supernatural gifts, these abilities reflect variations in natural human capacity to perceive quantum information. Neuroscience research has identified specific brain patterns associated with this heightened sensitivity, particularly increased activity in right temporal lobe regions and greater connectivity between brain hemispheres. This research suggests not that these experiences originate in the brain, but that certain brain configurations more readily receive quantum information from beyond the physical dimension. Most people can develop greater sensitivity through consistent practice, just as most people can develop musical ability through training even if they don't possess natural talent. Your capacity to perceive communication from loved ones who have transitioned isn't fixed, but can grow through intention, practice, and emotional openness. The interdimensional nature of consciousness explains why connections with deceased loved ones often strengthen rather than fade over time. From a materialist perspective, memories should gradually diminish as neural pathways decay. Yet many people report that their sense of connection with deceased loved ones actually intensifies years or even decades after the physical death. This paradoxical strengthening makes perfect sense within the quantum consciousness model as you develop greater perceptual sensitivity to interdimensional communication, and as your loved one in the parallel dimension develops greater skill at reaching across the boundary. Genuine connection naturally grows stronger. What begins as vague impressions or dream visitations may evolve into more specific guidance, synchronicities, or even direct knowing. This isn't wishful thinking, but the natural development of quantum connections between entangled consciousness across dimensional boundaries. The most profound aspect of living between worlds is recognizing that you already exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Your physical experience represents just one expression of your multidimensional consciousness. Even while embodied, parts of your consciousness naturally extend into quantum fields beyond physical form, explaining phenomena like intuition, creative inspiration, and transcendent spiritual experiences. Those who have died simply transition to fuller awareness of these non-physical dimensions that we access only partially while focused in physical reality. This understanding transforms not just our relationship with death, but our experience of life itself. We begin recognizing how constantly we receive information and guidance from beyond the physical, including from loved ones who have transitioned. You're not separate from your deceased partner, parent, or friend, but intimately connected through the quantum field of consciousness you both share. You're not waiting until death to reunite, but learning to recognize the ways you remain united across the dimensional boundary right now. Our culture's materialist paradigm has created unprecedented fear around death, stripping away the wisdom, traditions that once provided context for the transition, while offering nothing meaningful to replace them. Without recognition of consciousness continuing beyond physical form, death becomes absolute annihilation, a prospect so terrifying that we've constructed elaborate psychological defenses to avoid facing it. We distract ourselves with constant entertainment, chase immortality through consumer products, and relegate death to sterile hospital environments where it remains hidden from everyday life. Yet this avoidance comes at tremendous psychological cost. Underlying anxiety that poisons our ability to fully embrace life, complicated grief when facing inevitable losses, and cultural impoverishment as we lose the wisdom traditions that once provided meaningful context for existence. The parallel universe understanding offers a revolutionary alternative, not through blind faith, but through integration of cutting-edge science with the experiential wisdom of countless people who have glimpsed beyond the veil. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the parallel universe hypothesis is how it brings science and spirituality into harmony after centuries of artificial separation. The quantum view of consciousness continuing beyond physical death aligns precisely with what spiritual traditions have taught for millennia, not as metaphorical comfort, but as literal description of multidimensional reality. Physics has circled back to ancient wisdom, with concepts like non-locality and quantum entanglement providing scientific language for what mystics have always described. This harmony between science and spirituality creates a more complete understanding than either could provide alone. The rigorous methodology of science combined with the experiential wisdom of spiritual traditions. The result isn't blind faith, but informed understanding. Recognition of consciousness continuing beyond physical death, not as wishful thinking, but as the most reasonable conclusion based on both scientific evidence and human experience across cultures and throughout history. This understanding transforms our relationship with mortality in practical, tangible ways. When we recognize that physical death represents transition rather than annihilation, we can approach it with curiosity rather than terror. This doesn't eliminate the natural grief of physical separation, but places it within a context that includes continued connection across dimensional boundaries. Those who have embraced this understanding report being able to face their own mortality with remarkable equanimity, not through denial, but through genuine recognition that their essential consciousness will continue beyond the physical form. This transformed relationship with death naturally ripples into a transformed experience of life, greater presence, deeper appreciation, and liberation from the desperate materialism that stems from terror of annihilation. When you know your consciousness isn't extinguished at death but transitions to continued existence in the parallel dimension, you're freed to live more authentically and meaningfully in this physical expression. The implications extend to how we support those approaching the death transition. Our current medical system primarily views death as failure to be postponed at all costs, often creating unnecessary suffering through interventions that extend biological function without considering quality of consciousness. The parallel universe understanding suggests a more nuanced approach, recognizing physical death as a natural transition to be navigated with awareness, rather than a catastrophe to be avoided at all costs. Hospice care pioneered this perspective, focusing on supporting conscious transition, rather than merely prolonging physical function. Those working closely with the dying consistently report that people approach death very differently when they recognize it as transformation rather than ending, often experiencing profound peace, heightened awareness, and meaningful connection with those who have already transitioned and appear to assist their crossing. These aren't hallucinations of dying brains, but glimpses of the dimensional reality that awaits, one where consciousness continues without the limitations of physical form. This understanding also transforms how we relate to those who have already transitioned. Rather than relegating them to mere memory or abstract belief, we can develop conscious, ongoing relationships that acknowledge their continued existence in the parallel dimension. Many who have embraced this perspective report developing clear, consistent communication with deceased loved ones that provides genuine comfort, guidance, and continuation of the relationship across the dimensional boundary. This doesn't manifest as clinging to the past, but as recognition of an evolving connection that continues developing in new forms. Your deceased partner, parent, or child remains an active presence in your life, not through fantasy or denial, but through the natural quantum connections between entangled consciousness. Learning to recognize and nurture these connections doesn't prolong grief but transforms it into a new chapter of the relationship, one that continues evolving despite the change in dimensional expression. Indigenous cultures worldwide have maintained sophisticated understanding of death as dimensional transition rather than ending, preserving practices that facilitate both conscious dying and ongoing relationship with ancestors. These traditions weren't primitive superstitions, but sophisticated technologies for navigating the multidimensional nature of consciousness. Modern Western culture's dismissal of these wisdom traditions hasn't represented progress, but loss, disconnection, from practical knowledge about dimensional transitions that humans had cultivated for thousands of years. The quantum understanding of consciousness offers the possibility of reclaiming this wisdom within a contemporary framework, one that integrates scientific understanding with the experiential knowledge developed across cultures throughout human history. This integration doesn't require adopting specific spiritual beliefs, but simply recognizing the multidimensional nature of consciousness that quantum physics has now scientifically validated. Perhaps most revolutionary is how the parallel universe understanding transforms our conception of identity itself. The materialist paradigm identifies you with your physical body and brain, a perspective that makes death absolutely terrifying, as it implies complete annihilation of everything you are. The quantum understanding recognizes that your essential identity exists in consciousness itself, the awareness that experiences through the physical system, but isn't identical to it. Your body and brain are more like instruments through which your consciousness temporarily experiences physical reality, rather than the totality of what you are. This perspective doesn't diminish the value of physical existence, but places it within the larger context of your multidimensional nature. You don't have consciousness. You are consciousness, temporarily expressing through physical form but not limited to it. This recognition transforms death from annihilation to transition. Your essential being continues, simply shifting from physical to non-physical expression within the greater field of consciousness that underlies all reality. The fear that most haunts human existence, fear of absolute ending, of permanent separation from all we love, dissolves in the light of this understanding. Not through denial or fantasy, but through recognition of what contemporary science and human experience both suggest. Consciousness continues beyond physical death in ways we can still meaningfully connect with from this dimension. This doesn't eliminate the natural grief of physical separation, but transforms it, from despair at permanent loss to the challenge of learning new forms of connection across dimensional boundaries. The quantum entanglement you share with your deceased loved ones creates bridges between dimensions that allow continued relationship, albeit in forms different from physical interaction. As you develop greater sensitivity to interdimensional communication, and as they develop greater skill at reaching across the boundary, these connections naturally strengthen over time. The relationship doesn't end with physical death, but evolves into new expression, one that can continue providing love, guidance, and meaningful connection, despite the change in dimensional frequency. The ultimate invitation of the parallel universe understanding is to recognize that you already exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Your physical experience represents just one expression of your multidimensional consciousness. Even while embodied, parts of your awareness naturally extend beyond physical form, explaining experiences like intuition, creative inspiration, and transcendent spiritual states. Those who have died haven't gone somewhere distant, but have simply transitioned to greater awareness of these non-physical dimensions that you already partially access while focused in physical reality. This recognition transforms not just your relationship with death, but your experience of life itself. You begin perceiving how constantly you receive information and guidance from beyond the physical, including from loved ones who have transitioned. You're not separated by death from those you love, but remain intimately connected through the quantum consciousness you share. You don't need to wait until your own death to reunite. You can learn to recognize and develop the ways you remain united across dimensional boundaries right now. In this moment, as you continue your extraordinary journey through multidimensional reality, as we stand at the threshold between worlds, gazing into the quantum mirror that reflects our multidimensional nature, we face a profound choice: to remain trapped in the materialist paradigm that makes death an absolute ending, or to embrace the extraordinary evidence suggesting our consciousness continues beyond physical form. This isn't merely academic theory, but a living truth experienced by countless people who have glimpsed beyond the veil, through near-death experiences, meaningful connections with deceased loved ones, or moments of expanded awareness that transcend ordinary perception. The consistency of these experiences across cultures throughout history, and now validated by quantum physics, reveals not comforting fantasy, but genuine recognition of our multidimensional nature. The universe whispers its greatest secret in every moment of connection across the boundary. Death is not an ending, but a transition. Not a wall, but a doorway. Not annihilation, but transformation into continued existence beyond physical limitations. The loved ones you've mourned. Your mother whose laugh still echoes in your memory. Your father whose wisdom still guides your choices. Your child whose absence created a void nothing could fill. They aren't lost in oblivion or reduced to abstract memory. They exist now in this moment in a parallel dimension where consciousness continues its eternal journey. The pain of physical separation remains real, yet it transforms when placed within this larger context of continued connection across dimensional boundaries. Those moments when you've sensed their presence, dreamed of them with unusual clarity, or received guidance that seemed to come from beyond yourself. These weren't wishful thinking, but genuine glimpses of the quantum bridges that connect your consciousness across dimensions. The relationship hasn't ended, but evolved into new expression, one that requires developing different perceptual sensitivities, yet can provide genuine continuation of love, connection, and growth, despite the change in form. Perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of this understanding is how it transforms not just our relationship with death, but our experience of life itself. When we recognize the quantum nature of consciousness, existing simultaneously across multiple dimensions, we begin living differently in this physical expression. The desperate materialism born from terror of annihilation gives way to deeper presence, authentic purpose, and recognition of meaning beyond physical accumulation or achievement. We begin perceiving the subtle guidance constantly flowing from beyond the physical, including from those who have transitioned, and developing our capacity to receive this wisdom through intuition, dreams, synchronicities, and moments of expanded awareness. We recognize physical life not as our only existence, but as one important chapter in our eternal journey of consciousness evolution, a precious opportunity to grow, love, and contribute to the greater field of consciousness that spans dimensions and transcends physical death. What awaits us beyond the threshold isn't darkness but light, not isolation but reunion, not unconsciousness but expanded awareness freed from physical limitations. The evidence from those who have glimpsed beyond the veil consistently describes a reality more vivid than ordinary life, where consciousness perceives with clarity unfiltered by physical senses, where time and space operate by different rules, where love transcends the limitations of physical expression. Your transition, when it eventually arrives, won't be an ending but an awakening, not the extinguishing of your consciousness, but its expansion into awareness beyond the constraints of physical form. And yet, you needn't wait for that transition to begin developing your multidimensional awareness. The connections across dimensional boundaries exist right now, waiting to be recognized and developed through intention, practice, and emotional openness to the subtle whispers from beyond the physical frequency. The universe isn't a machine but a living consciousness expressing through infinite dimensions simultaneously. You aren't merely a physical body destined for dust, but eternal awareness experiencing temporarily through physical form. Death isn't an ending but a doorway, not the extinguishing of consciousness, but its liberation into expanded expression. Those you've loved who have crossed the threshold aren't gone but transformed, not absent but present in ways that transcend physical senses, yet remain accessible through the quantum connections you share. This understanding doesn't require blind faith but simply recognition of what contemporary science and human experience both suggest. Consciousness is fundamental, not an emergent property of matter, but the field from which matter arises. As you integrate this recognition, the fear that haunts human existence begins dissolving into profound peace, not through denial of death, but through recognition of its true nature as transition rather than ending. Remember, you are not a body, having occasional spiritual experiences. You are consciousness having a temporary physical experience. When you truly understand this, everything changes. Not just how you face death, but how you live each precious moment in this physical expression of your eternal journey. If this perspective resonates with you, share it with others who might find comfort and expanded understanding. Subscribe to join our community of consciousness explorers as we continue investigating the extraordinary frontiers where science and spirituality converge, revealing the multidimensional nature of reality and our place within it.